Hello and welcome back. In this episode, we're going to touch on Sparx baselining. So in Sparx, baselines are used to manage versions of model package or packages, allowing users to capture and compare snapshots of the models at various points in time. This is particularly useful in large projects for tracking changes, supporting version control, and conducting impact analysis. With baselines in Sparx Enterprise Architect, you can capture a baseline, compare with other baselines, restore to a baseline, any baseline, export and import baselines, integrate with version control systems, used for change management, audits, and collaboration. Most importantly, you can use it for backup and recovery. Now I'm in Sparx version 17, build 1703. I'm now on build 1704. We'll talk about that in a later episode. But under the design tab, there's a new feature called timelines. And what's cool about timelines is that you can look at a particular session that you're working on. In this case, we had nothing when we started. We added a couple of elements. We added a couple of more elements. We made some light changes. We restored back to 2 elements, made some changes. So what's really cool about timelines is that you're able to take snapshots in real time in sessions and see what's going on. That's unlike baselines. So I'm hoping to get some time in this session to talk about timelines. But right now, let's get into baselines. So we're in the default Sparx layout, right? And you could certainly stay in this layout if you want. I just recommend that you bring up Toolbox. However, I like to work in my own workspace layout, which I call common, and it keeps Toolbox over on the left and it moves browser to the right with notes on the lower right. And I have other tooling that's available for modeling. So set your workspace up any way you want and let's get started. I first want to talk about how to get to baseline. So we're going to select the package here. You're going to see me typically use shortcut keys, Control, Alt, and B, and it brings up the Baseline Dialog Box. All right. So I'm going to use that quite a bit. The other way is to go to Design in the Package panel, Manage, and then you're going to see Manage Baselines, and you can get to the dialog box. The other thing that you can do in this tooling is go to Manage and View Baseline. So you're able to look at the baselines that are produced over time. So let's bring in some class elements. So I'm going to select class in the toolbox and then click over here to drag and drop it in. I'm going to draw a second class, bring out an association. We're going to bring in another class element with an association. And there we go. So we've got class 1 and class 2 in this diagram. Let's go ahead and hit Control S and save. Now let's pretend we've been working a few hours. We're in a much more complex project and we have a lot more elements in here than this. All right, what we're going to do is we're going to select the package. We're going to hit Control, Alt, and B for baseline. There are no baselines here. We're going to select New Baseline and we're going to use this versioning scheme 0.01. I don't need all of this stuff in here. I can type whatever notes I want. I'm just going to say day 1 for this demonstration. And we're going to use include subpackages. This is checked by default. We want to always leave this checked. If for some reason you do not want the subpackages, you can uncheck it. But let's go ahead and hit OK. And now we've got a baseline in here. Now you can come back here anytime you want, see what changes were made. In this case, we just did this. So we're going to use show differences. There are no changes because we just did it. No changes since the last baseline. But if you were to come in and start moving things and bringing in new class elements, we're not going to draw an association yet. And then you were to, let's go ahead and save. We're going to hit Control, Alt, and B again. Bring up baseline, show differences, right? And now we can see, well, a new class was added. That's what this green marker says. to my first baseline as a diagram, this icon right here. The blue means a change is made. Visual elements, a change is made in class 2 is all geometry, moved around a little bit. Class 3 is new, and it doesn't have a baseline before, but it now has some new geometry, how the element was moved around, laid out, and so on. All right? Let's go ahead and bring in some more model elements. Let's bring in another class element. Just drop it right here. We're going to draw an association. We're going to draw another association between 2 and 3. There we go. We're going to save. We're going to hit Control-Alt-B. It's the end of a long workday, and we want to create a new baseline. This is going to be 02, and we're just going to say day 2, and put as much notes as you want in here, and there we go. And we can come in and we can compare to day 1. So what changed between day 2 and day 1? Show differences. So you select the item you want to compare it to, show differences. And you can see a lot of new elements and associations were added. Some changes were made to the diagram. Some changes were made to class 2. You can see 3 and 4 are new, and so on. So you're able to do a compare and see what's going on in a particular model over time. All right, speaking about modeling over time, let's go to design, and in the package panel, select timelines. And for me, it pops up in the upper right here, right? So in this session, we're going to right click on this, show snapshot. So we started with nothing, a blank diagram. And then moments later, we added 2 elements. And then we made some changes and added a 3rd element. And then we added a 4th element, and drew some associations. So the cool thing about timelines or snapshots, you can see my first baseline, and it has this diagram up here. What I want to do is, this is where we took a baseline at this snapshot with 4 elements, 4 objects, and then we have 3 connections. What I want to do is save to snapshots. And I can say work on day 2, and I can get as verbose as I want to in my notes here. I'm not going to check tag as filtered. I'm just going to hit OK, right? Now, if I go over to snapshots, I have a save snapshot, show snapshot of this diagram at this time, right? And then I can start to build up a repository. We're going to create a baseline snapshot. Let me do that. I can build up a repository, work from day 2 of other work. And now this is checked for us, full object features, leave it checked and hit OK. So now I have a snapshot as an image, right? And here I have a snapshot as a baseline. Right? And I can compare. But we're going to build up some more. This session's not about timelines, so I don't want to get too carried away. Play around with it. Very powerful. But let's go back and talk about baselines. So I'm sitting here, Control, Alt, and B. We have day 2 baselines. Let's show if differences, if any changes were made, and no, there weren't. All right? So a lot of times when you're working with a team, you have different modelers that are in a project, and you step away for a day off or lunch and you come back, you're able to very quickly see what has changed by other modelers within this particular diagram or package. So baselines is very powerful for taking snapshots. So we've talked about creating a new baseline, restoring to a baseline, and showing the difference. There's something called delete selected. Now be very careful when you're doing this, but let's do something here. What we're going to do is draw an association between 4 and 1, all right? Then we're going to go Control, Alt, and B, bring up the baseline window, and we're going to create a new baseline, 03, right? And we're going to call this day 2. It's the same day we're doing some work in here, right? And we can show the difference between this version and this version. So show differences, and you can see that we drew a new association between class 1 and class 4. All right. Now you're coming in here, Control Alt and B, you're bringing up your baseline window, and you no longer want 02 to be in this baseline. You can hit delete and 02 is gone. So you go from 01 to 03. There's no getting it back. So if you did that by accident, that is gone. So be very, very careful, and I'm going to show you how to protect yourself next. So while you're in the baseline dialog, you're going to notice an option down here, export file. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to export, and you're going to have a repository where you save such exports. I'm going to go ahead and overwrite this one here. This is my first baseline day 2 and already exists. Yes. And now that is saved. All right. So what I'm going to do is delete day 2. All right. So we're going to delete this selection, and my goodness, I hope this works. So here we go. We're going to import file. All right. So we come back in, we inadvertently deleted something. We have a backup, we want to restore. So we're going to hit open, and we have an option here to give it a number, version number, and change the notes. We're going to just say day 2 updates, something like that. There we go. And we're going to hit OK. And now you can see day 2 updates. And let's show differences. Show differences, no differences. Compared to day 1, Control Alt B. We want to show differences to day 1. Here's all the changes that were made. All right. So we have talked about baselines. We've touched on baselines, from show differences to restoring a baseline, creating a new baseline, deleting a baseline, load other baselines. This is a more advanced subject, not in scope for this session. We've talked about importing a baseline that was exported previously to recover, restore, compare model to file. You can go to select this, and you can compare to any file, and that's the file that came in. And of course, there's going to be no differences. But if you were to save each baseline as its own file, and you wanted to look back on a baseline that potentially you removed from this dialog box, you can do that using compare models to baseline. You go out to your repository. All right. It's good to have a good naming convention so you're able to find that. All right. We're not going to talk about options. This is more advanced. We'll talk about it in a later session. And yeah, that's baselining. Very powerful. It's a type of versioning. In later sessions, we'll show when you're exporting your files, you can export them to your Git version control repository, manage your XML there. More advanced subject. We'll talk about that later as well. All right. All right. That's going to conclude this session. You've learned how to get to baselines by selecting the package that you want to view. It'll bring up the baseline dialog box. You're able to manage baselines. You've also learned how to go to the design tab in the package panel, manage. You can get to baselines, and you can get to the baseline dialog box that way. You can also go to manage and view baselines and look across your project to see what baselines have been made over a period of time. I think you can imagine when you get into a project, a large project, or even your own research and development and learning projects, how quickly you're able to look at, well, what have I learned over a period of time? What have we done over a period of time? And being able to zero in on that and do compares over that period of time. You can do that at any level. So this is at the project level. You have solution architects, design architects that are able to also go to baselines for their particular areas and look at progress over time. And with Sparx 17, we now have timelines that allow you to look at projects, work, diagram delivery over a period of time. Maybe you just got through with some architecture and you're working with the design architect and you have a conference call with the team and you want to take a timeline snapshot or a baseline of what has taken place over that particular architecture in that particular time. So very powerful way to version your diagrams. Look at those versions over a period of time to understand what's taking place as you're delivering your systems, your software, or anything that is model driven. Thanks very much for watching this video. Let me know how you're versioning in Sparx Enterprise Architect. Are you using baselines? Are you doing some of the things that we talked about? Whether your project's extremely large or whether it's just a small learning experience, research and development, how are you keeping track of your versions of diagrams, models, and packages over that period of time? All right, so until that next episode, happy modeling.